and welcome. I'm Gloria Palmer, the Executive Director of Green Mountain Academy for Lifelong Learning. Thank you so much for joining us here in the Arkell Pavilion, and also to those joining us online. We are thrilled for tonight's program, and before I introduce our guests, I have just a few points to make. First of all, please silence your cell phones. And during Q&A, we will have a couple of microphones passed around, so raise your hand and someone will get the microphone to you. I want to also encourage those online to type your questions in the chat feature and we will moderate that. I would like to thank GNAT-TV for their support as a media sponsor, recording and managing the live stream feature. This kind of outreach support allows us to connect with people outside of our geographic area. And we are truly grateful to the Southern Vermont Arts Center for hosting many of GMALL's programs here on their campus, and in particular for this evening's event. The moderator for this evening's conversation is James E. Mahon Jr. He is the Woodrow Wilson Professor of Political Science at Williams College. Professor Mahon teaches courses on political economy, comparative politics, Latin American politics, U.S. and Latin American foreign relations, and Cuba. And our special guest, Deval Patrick, is a senior partner at the Vistria Group, a private investment firm that seeks to deliver both superior financial returns and meaningful impact. He serves as the David R. Gergen Professor of the Practice of Public Leadership at the Harvard Kennedy School, where he was co-director of the Center for Public Leadership from 2022 to 24. Prior to joining the Vistria Group, Mr. Patrick was the founder and former managing partner of Bain Capital Double Impact. And before that, from 2007 to 2015, he served as governor of Massachusetts. He has been a senior executive in 2 Fortune 50 companies, a partner in 2 Boston law firms, and by appointment of President Bill Clinton, the Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights in the United States Justice Department. He is a Rockefeller Fellow, a Crown Fellow of the Aspen Institute, and the author of 2 books. We are honored to have them here with us. Please join me in welcoming our guests.
Oh my. Thanks, Gloria. Oh, you prepared.
Yeah. I sent you most of these. Well, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Southern Vermont Arts Center, and thank you to Green Mountain Academy for having us and for bringing us together, because I do think this is a time for us to come together. The sky over our democracy is darkening, and we have to figure out what to do about it. 24 years ago, this country suffered a terrorist attack, and about 24 hours ago, this country suffered a very significant assassination. And I say that the country suffered it because it wasn't just one person, one family that was struck down. It was the sense that in politics we can sort things out without violence. So now we're getting closer to the precipice. So we have to think about that as much as we think about how to restore some kind of balance, some kind of rule of law in our competition between parties. So we'll have a little bit tonight about party strategy and things like that, but we're also going to have, I think, the overall theme is the health of American democracy. How does that sound to you?
That sounds extraordinarily important, and I'm grateful that you acknowledged the shocking assassination today and shared what I think we all worry about, which is that this may be yet another step down into the coming apart of not just American democracy, but American community. And I hope that is what we come back to in the end, because I think that may be what saves us.
Right. So I'm sure all of us have opinions about this, and I think that most of us would agree that a big part of the problem is that so many people live so much of their lives online that their attention is focused on social media and so on, where due to the algorithms, as most of us know of, that feed us the kinds of things that are going to that we're going to respond to, often with anger. Because of those, it has a tendency to polarize us, has a tendency to anger us against other people. And maybe we should just take a vacation from that. And maybe that would be the best thing to start with, right? Anyway, so I guess we could start with comments on the really what's happened yesterday and the response of the president. I think it was something that's also newsworthy. And then we'll move on to the kinds of things that we might do or that we might have thought about before yesterday. Okay? So, do you have any more comments about the assassination and about the responses to it so far?
Well, I was in New York yesterday evening when someone came up, a couple people came up and said, "Did you see what happened to Charlie Kirk?" And I didn't know, and everyone else seemed to know. And he produced his smartphone and proceeded to show me a video of the shooting, which I have not been able to get out of my head since. I think that regardless, for me, regardless of where someone is on the political spectrum or whether you share that person's view or not, democracy has to be about solving problems through conversation and persuasion and not violence. And I thought that the president's reaction for the first couple minutes of, I haven't watched it all, and haven't watched all the reporting about it, but for the first couple minutes, he sounded statesmanlike. He cannot sustain that for long. And it's a serious problem. I'm not meaning to be glib. There is a way in which I think leaders have to learn that they are leading all the time. That their careless word or thoughtless gesture also conveys something. And I think there are ways in which, in fact, the president understands that to the detriment of all of us. When I was in office during the marathon bombing, and I remember we had some, we were terrified. We were surrounded by uncertainty. We were trying to manage through that fear, first for the initial response, but then to get on with the investigation. And I remember a couple days in, after extraordinary police work, law enforcement work with agencies from all over every jurisdiction. I mean, federal agencies, the name of which I'd never heard of and I didn't know existed, all at our disposal. And they did this amazing amount of work. And I think it was on the third day, they had pieced together through lots of different sources some kind of grainy images of potential suspects. And they were grainy images of two suspects with brown skin. And they said, and I wasn't directing the investigation, but we had sort of relationship where they would bring what they felt were the bigger questions to me. And they said, "We'd like to release these photographs." And I said, "Well, can you identify these people?" And they said, "No. That's why we'd like to release the photographs." I said, "As soon as you release the photographs, everything speeds up." And I remember Charles Stewart back in Boston. I don't know if any of you do. Where a surviving gunshot victim claimed that he had been attacked, he and his wife and unborn baby had been attacked by a black carjacker in a hoodie. And the Boston police turned out the black neighborhood in Boston. There are adults today who still humiliated. I said, we are not going to do that. We have to think around the corner and about what the implications are. By the next day, 24 hours later, we had clear identities, better information. We went live there. My point is, the president has to be thinking about what he incites and inspires. A president, a leader, about what he incites and inspires. And I'm sad to say I don't think this president in his public life has thought hard about the consequences of that. And there have been lots of sad examples of that.
Yeah, I just would comment that it seems like we live in the age of the hot take. And people often think that whoever comes to a conclusion about something first must be right. And of course, we know the opposite. We know that you don't get a good investigation unless you have time to sift through things. And that's why paid media is often better, because people are paid to do that, right? That's why they say that the truth is paywalled, even though all the lies are free. So we kind of have that kind of hot take, I think, that kind of mindset is getting into politics. You know? It's too bad, because it often is something that polarizes us further. But
well, sensationally, you talked about social media. Sensationalism drives the algorithm, right? Shock. It's almost as if the, lack of decorum has become entertainment, right? In this sort of reality TV society we live in. It pays to be reminded that there are rules, many of them unwritten, that make democracy work. And there are rules around restraint and respect and decorum that seem old-fashioned, but actually, you talk, when I'm out talking without a microphone with lots of people in lots of parts of the country, folks get that. And in part because of what we get instead, I think our biggest challenge today is not Democrat, Republican, it's inside or outsider. Most people have just said, that's not for me. I'm just not going to pay attention to it. And so we get a lot of focus on a lot of noise from a relatively small number of people, frankly, on each end of the political spectrum.
okay, so let's change the subject a little bit to a topic that we would have been talking about immediately 2 days ago, and maybe something that's going to be important in 2 weeks if we're lucky, or 3 weeks, or 2 months, and that is something about the Democratic Party, something that we should know about, and you probably have some insight into.
Okay.
And this is what a lot of people in the Democratic Party care about, but also a lot of people who are outside the party who would like to see a vigorous opposition in the United States, because that is basically how you preserve democracy. So let's start with this idea that people have repeatedly said, lots of formerly reliable Democratic voters, especially men, minority men, defected from the Democrats in the last election. That went along with the earlier erosion of white, rural, and working class support. Now everybody's asking themselves the question, what should the Democrats do now? And I guess I'm going to ask you that.
Wow. Well, I see our time is running right along. So I want to push back a little bit on a premise because of your question, if I may, respectfully, Jim, because I think it's part of the way in which Democratic operatives are stuck. This notion of the reliable Democratic voter, right? There are an awful lot of, we were talking about the consultant class. Some of my friends who were here and I were talking about this earlier. We have a bad habit, I feel, among that consultant class and many at the National Democratic level of counting votes without asking for them. We presume this group and that group and this group, and so we just talk to the folks we think of as undecided. And I think that that has contributed, frankly, to this notion I was saying earlier that the political dynamic, as I observe it, isn't Democrat-Republican anymore. It's insider-outsider. I'll give you kind of a crude example. I think it was 77 million people who voted for Donald Trump in the last election, 76 million maybe, who voted for Kamala Harris, and 90 million eligible voters stayed out of it. 90 million eligible voters. If you are a Democrat in a so-called blue state, I hate these terms, nobody talks to you. If you're a Republican in a so-called red state, nobody talks to you. I always say they come to Massachusetts because we are an ATM. All the candidates come, they ask for money, and they leave. If you don't live in a battleground state, so-called, nobody talks to you. You could easily think a presidential election has nothing to do with you at all. So I think that there's this is an observation I stumbled onto naively when I was running for governor the first time. We may have talked about this when you know, I was not, I didn't have any name recognition. I didn't have any. I wasn't active in the state party. I was a reliable Democrat, but not the sort of Democrat who thought you had to hate Republicans to be a good Democrat. Because that sounds sort of old-fashioned too. That wasn't that long ago. But the way for the philosophical reason we ran a grassroots campaign is because I really felt like everybody should be invited to be a part of their own civic and political future. The tactical reason for doing so is because in Massachusetts, the Democratic political establishment is very tight and very closed off. And they had already decided who the nominee should be before there was even an organizing of the campaign. So when I started to get out and talk to people and listen to folks, I'd find in Berkshire County, folks would say, well, you know, Beacon Hill just cares about Beacon Hill, the neighborhood around Beacon Hill. Then you go into central Massachusetts, you hear the same thing. And you go up to Merrimack Valley and the North Shore, and you hear the same thing, and down to the Cape and the islands and South Shore, the same thing, and the neighborhood of Roxbury, walking distance from Beacon Hill, the same thing. That it was all about what was the game inside and not the service outside. And that was its own organizing principle for me. And I have seen evidence of this over and over again in national campaigns, in campaigns that, you know, new candidates I talk to are thinking about running, and the advice they're getting. You can count on this one, you can count on that one, so don't spend any time or money or build a new organization there. Go talk to these folks who live in this little band who have money and will make up their minds depending on what you have to say to them. And it's incredibly limiting, I think. So the person, I'm sorry to go on, but I feel really strongly about this. The person who I think did more to shape the party, if that's a thing, than anyone in, I think, recent history, was Howard Dean, when he talked about the 50-state strategy, and he was right. He was right.
So it sounds to me like you're saying that Democrats should ask everybody for their vote, but maybe first ask everybody what kinds of issues are important to you.
That's exactly what I think. I think we should be out listening. And I'm not saying this as an operative. I don't know anything about running campaigns. I was blessed when I met the genius who ran my campaign, when I said, look, I just want to focus on why. I want you to focus on how. And he was masterful. I learned so much just by being out and listening and taking the time. When I was a kid in Chicago, my mother was a member of the Young Democrats Club, I think it was. And it was a social club. But they paid attention to things like, Saturday night potlucks and whether, who who did or didn't have a turkey at Thanksgiving. But everybody knew who was new in the neighborhood, who wasn't, who was registered, who wasn't, who was available at what time at election. It was just a part, this was the so-called Chicago machine. We invented, Democrats did, this idea of grassroots organizing, and then we got a little cute and said we can raise as much money as possible for 30-second ads in the last few weeks of the campaign and form relationships with people that way, which you can do if you believe there are reliable Democratic voters.
So let's move on to a couple issues. The central issue, I think, for the Republicans and for President Trump in the last election was immigration. And for an awful lot of people who look at the Democratic Party, they say, you guys didn't think seriously about that. You didn't think seriously about how it sits with voters. How do you think they screwed up on you?
Whew. So I really have to stop picking on the consultant class, but there was widespread political advice, I was going to say political wisdom, from the consultant class in the last 2 or 3 cycles to stay, at the national level, to stay away from immigration. That's the way I heard it. Stay away from immigration. Why? Because it's a bad issue for you. I mean, look, I don't, well, I was going to say we have to. I give the president credit. He often raises the right questions. It's just, for me, his answers are terrible. Really terrible. I mean, the notion that a modern immigration system with updated rules and so forth, which to me is exactly what we should be talking about. And you used to hear people talk about comprehensive immigration reform. Well, where's the proposal? Put it on the table. Of course it's going to make some people mad, but you express a point of view about modern, appropriate rules and the importance of living by them. And I think to me, it's an opportunity to call out one of the many false choices we are offered in modern politics today. You don't have to demean and terrorize, undocumented people to secure the border. That does nothing to do. But we think that's the choice. Either we, beat somebody up, or terrorize them and their family, or if we don't, we will have we can't have secure borders. What is that? It makes no sense. So we don't offer an alternative. So opposition is incredibly important to bad public policy, but alternatives are equally important, I think, for democratic leadership.
I just want to ask one follow-up on that, because it seems to me there's a lot of division within the Democratic coalition on immigration. There are some people who say, look, if you don't let in everybody who looks like me, you're discriminating against me. And then there's other people who say, no, you should restrict it and so on. And we'll talk about guest workers or what have you. But the Republicans seem to also have managed a really diverse coalition on immigration too, right? There's part of the Republican coalition that will kind of demonize people when they cross the border, especially if they do it illegally. But then there's another part of the Republican coalition, the richer part, which hires those people down the road, right? And in fact, there's a stable equilibrium there, because people who are demonized when they cross the border make pretty good employees. They don't talk back much. Right? So they've worked this out. How do Democrats work it out?
Well, first of all, I think we have to have the debate. I think if polling is to be believed, the tactics of this administration in dealing with immigration are increasingly unpopular among Republicans too. It's one thing, I read somewhere, it's one thing to talk about so-called illegals. It's another thing to talk about your neighbor and what he or she is experiencing. But again, the question is the right question, right? What should our immigration rules be? We ought to be fearless in having that debate. That, I think, is what politics is supposed to be about, right? How do you persuade? How do you come to the right compromise position? How do you win support for that position? And then how do you get on with implementing it? We're not getting anywhere right now. And you know, the fact is that for a long time, capital has moved seamlessly across borders, but labor and talent has not. And that's part of the problem. We've got a lot of unmet need here. And simply saying, well, if farm workers are not permitted, then working Americans will take those jobs. It just doesn't, I mean, even if you had enough working Americans or eligible Americans to take those jobs, we wouldn't have enough people to get those and other kinds of jobs done.
Well, that's a pretty good segue. I wanted to turn to something about people responding to the Trump administration, to these things that are unpopular, even with Republicans. I now regularly read a publication called The Bulwark. I don't know if any of you know it, but a great number of the people forming the core of this are ex-Republicans, people like Bill Kristol and so on. And they are all about, we have to resist Trump, and they're quite enthusiastic about it. And so what would you say, what advice would you give to people who are Democrats, Republicans, and independents who are at the point now where they feel like we don't like the way things are going? How do they resist when the Republican Party has all the levers of power in Washington? And particularly, how about Democratic governors? So we thought that you might have particular insight into that, but also concerned citizens, right? So what do you think?
Well, I will start with concerned citizens, because it all ought to start there, and maybe take the opportunity to remind us all that we have agency. Democracy and government, for that matter, is not some abstract thing out there. It's us, right? It's the name, as Barney Frank used to say, it's the name we give to the things we choose to do together. And I think, finding those people, not just the ones who agree with you, but the ones who agree with you on everything. That's the other thing, right? We're in this incredible do loop where if you don't agree on everything, you can't work together on anything. You can't talk about anything if you don't agree on everything. And that's such an immature way to live, and an uninteresting way to live, for that matter. So I think for private citizens, not just to kind of talk, for us, not just to talk ourselves or remind ourselves that we have some civic agency in the outcomes of our democracy, but actually to show up, do those standouts, go to protests. There's a marvelous group I love called Movement Voter Project. Do you know them? MVP.org, I think it is. That is identifying and supporting grassroots groups all over the country of various kinds who are organized around issues, and not just resistance, but also issues, but are all about bringing people who are outside of political activity and engagement or interest in, and inviting them in. And this notion of, we are hungry for, I think as human beings, just hungry for community. We are hungry for it. It's a thing it's almost human to crave it. And you can find that in civic activities, not all political, but in civic activity. And there I think is where the sense of common cause and common interests lies, and trust is built. And from that, I think there's a whole lot of good that can come, especially if you, like me, believe that there is basic good in Americans. We can come back to that if you like. For office holders, I think, particularly in DC, I think resistance is, as I was saying earlier, important. I think objecting is important. I think the speeches are important. I think the parliamentary maneuvers are important, but I also think alternatives are important. Now, sometimes an outrage just has to be called an outrage, and a lot, and often. I was, maybe as an aside, I don't know about you, but if I get one more email saying this is an outrage, and if you just send $2 now, all will be well, I think I'm gonna, there's gotta be more to it than another fundraising opportunity. But on some of these big issues like immigration, like crime, like the cost of living or the cost of housing, the paucity of affordable and workforce housing, let's have some ideas. One of the most exciting things I think about this moment, really encouraging things about this moment from a political point of view that is just kind of so frustrating that I don't see more Democrats seizing it, is that there seems to be appetite at large in America today for big ideas. Big ideas. What are big ideas? What are 1, 2, 3 big transformative ideas? Is now the time really to make a push for national service, and why? Why? What does that do for us? How does that, just as an example. So I'd like to see more alternatives, and I'd like to see less of the resistance turn into a statement and then an appeal for money. And then for governors, there are ways in which there are ways in which we've never decided whether we want a country or not, as opposed to 50 plus, I guess, different ways of. I love this idea of states as laboratories of democracy, but we are constantly working out what is federal and what is state or local. We're constantly working that out. That is part of the genius of the system, but it also can go to absurd levels. I mean, who solves a pandemic state by state? It makes no sense. Scientifically, it makes no sense. From a public health point of view, it makes no sense. There are certain things where it just seems to me we have to be more assertive about what kinds of solutions are more effective solutions nationally or at least regionally. For the governors in those places where the troops are being sent into the cities, and I will say they're all in a tough place because of jurisdictional questions. I think maybe Governor Pritzker has been among the most interesting to me because he's been out consistently, and he shows up on the street, and he talks to, and he's been organizing people on the street, and it may take that nowadays. Sorry to say, peacefully, yes, but I'd rather have unrest in our hearts than in the streets, but I want unrest in our hearts. I think there's a lot more damage being done to the moral clarity and foundation of our choices in this country right now, has much greater implications than choices of policy, but choices around what we represent, not just to the world, as important as that is, but to each other. And I want to hear more of that from our public leaders at whatever level.
So governors can serve as examples for the responsible exercise of power?
I hope so. I'd like them to. And I think they have that opportunity. And I think a lot of citizens are looking to governors to do that.
Back to the Democratic Party. that really suffered losses among young people last election. Now, we're among a lot of older people, you and I too. Yeah, right.
I don't know.
But do you have any guesses? What have you heard from people? Have you talked to young people about this? I talk to young people as a college professor, but tell me, what are you hearing about what went wrong and how Democrats could fix it?
So I would reckon that the young people you talk to are like the young people I talk to, who are politically engaged and informed. At least the ones I'm close to in my family, they know not to show up for dinner if they haven't voted. They haven't brought 2, 3, or 4 others who weren't going to vote to vote. I think this point about insider outsider rather than party really resonates with young people. I think that's an opportunity. I think the idea of actually speaking to what is troubling, what folks are worried about. You know, when I was coming up, the American dream was a real thing. I lived it. I've had that experience. I don't think anybody has confidence that the American dream means anything today. And it's deeply discouraging. And so it's not, I think there are new strategies and new rhetoric that we have to find, but that idea of opportunity, that this is still a land where you have a chance and can make the most of that chance, that still resonates with people, including young people. And they don't feel, the ones I talk to, that an awful lot of candidates or office holders are speaking to that. It's very interesting. I mentioned I was in New York yesterday, and I was with some very establishment people in New York, and I was asking them, what about this young man who's running for mayor, Mamdani? Right. And to a person they said, well, first of all, he's going to win. Now, these are not political people, so anything can happen in politics. They said he's going to win. They said he's going to have a hard time delivering on what he promises. But his promises, they all believe, mirror the anxieties of the voters. So again, right questions, maybe the wrong answers, but the right questions. And the questions he's asking, or that he's elicited from people all over the city, including folks who haven't participated in a long time. So I don't think it's all about charisma and it's the humility to show up and to take and digest incoming ideas and make people, as I said earlier, to invite people to see their stake in their own political future. And I think the ones who do that are really effective with young people. I think Senator Sanders did that a cycle or two back, to tremendous effect.
Yeah, a guy who's older than everybody. But we think that Mamdani's connection with young people, which is really remarkable, might have something to do with his age, but you're suggesting it's just asking the right questions and putting stuff out there that is going to be something they really care about.
And as I say, I'd have different answers than they might, but I think it's wrong to say, well, I don't like your answer, so I'm going to ignore the question. It's like immigration, right? You were asking about earlier. I don't like the way Trump uses outsiders and otherness to divide us. But that doesn't mean we don't have an immigration system that's out of date.
Well, I think that this might be a good time to open up to questions from the audience. And I do have other questions myself, but...
Or comments or advice.
Comments, yes, right, advice. But this would be a good time, I think, because I don't want to run out of time for questions from the audience. So we have one here. Do we have the microphone?
I think someone's going to bring you a mic.
here, third row. To your left, sir.
Gentlemen, I didn't think I'd ever agree with the president on anything, but he's right, it's rigged. But he doesn't understand how it's rigged, except that they were able to have outstanding results in Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in 2016. I would like to talk about the structures that we have that are crippling us. 2 senators to a state is not democratic. Why don't we look like Europe and Japan and Australia? Why don't we have universal medical care? Polls show that people would like either the Canadian system or Medicare for all, but we can't get close to it because the Senate doesn't work. The Senate takes 60 votes just to get a vote on a bill. Also, the Electoral College, Birchby was able to get the entire House of Representatives unanimously approving the elimination of the Electoral College. And yet here in this century, we've already had 2 minority presidents. I just read the book of the Supreme Court Justice of California, I think his name is Shawinski, and he says, constitutions don't live forever. This one's broken. How do we get a constitutional convention to tear it apart? Do we have to go into a situation like the 30s with a Dust Bowl and starvation and Hoovervilles? Thank you.
You want to go first?
Well, look, I should just start with it that people, you're right about polls like that. Polls come back differently if you tell people we're going to have a big amendment to the Constitution. And an awful lot of people who are lawmakers hesitate to make big constitutional changes right now. Back in the 60s and 70s, we did it a few times, but I think you're right that people are seeing counter-majoritarian institutions in our democracy that are a problem. I don't think there's a prayer, though, that we could do anything about the Electoral College. They came very close and they got filibustered, as you said. I don't think it's going to happen because we have to get people who've been elected under that system to abolish the system that they got elected under. And I think the same goes for the Senate. You know, if you want to change the Constitution, you've got to get a lot of states that have, 2 senators, by the grace of God, right? That, when they only have relatively few representatives or 1, I don't think they're going to vote for it, and it's going to make it very difficult.
So I think there's a lot we can do. First of all, I think the system is broken. I think a friend of mine says we've been treating our democracy for a long time like it would tolerate limitless abuse without breaking. And we have been abusing it. I'm not talking about the Constitution, I'm talking about some of the things we can do short of the constitutional change. You talked about 2 senators from every state. That is less a problem than the filibuster rule, which is not in the Constitution. The 60 vote requirement in the Constitution in the Senate is a rule of the Senate. Guess where it comes from? It was invented to frustrate civil rights laws. And it was the Democrats who decided not to win in charge, not to vote an exception to that, to repair the Voting Rights Act just a few years ago. And it was Democrats who said, well, if we do it now, then they'll do it when they have a chance. Of course, they do. And so to use an anti-democratic rule to defeat a bill to improve democracy is completely on its head. Money, that's the other thing. The Citizens United decision was a devastating decision. When Barack Obama called it that during his State of the Union, you remember the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court broke decorum and said, that's terrible, that's not so. That's in fact what has happened. Money has an incredible influence on policy making and on politics. There's actually a very effective and encouraging initiative out right now called American Promise, which is about amending the Constitution, and they are way further along than you might imagine. I would say that one is helpful. The House has not, I'm going to leave aside gerrymandering, which is insane. You know, it's the office holders who pick the voters now, not the voters who pick the office holders. And both parties do that. It's at hyperdrive right now on the Republican side, but Democrats have done it too. What is worse is that the House has not voted to reduce the size of districts, I think, since the 1930s. Am I right?
No, they're huge. The 1938, I believe it is. Yeah, 435 forever now.
Right. So 435, and I think each district is a minimum of like 700,000.
It's getting even. You know, every year it gets bigger, right? Because the country gets more populous. I think it's around 800,000 now.
That is not in the Constitution. So the House can choose, and has in our history, to make those districts smaller. Now it makes the House bigger, but it also makes the House politics much more competitive. So those are just a couple of the things that are within our power to do something about.
I would just add that it's also not in the Constitution that we have to have single-member districts with first past the post elections. We could have proportional representation, and the incentives in campaigning would be totally different. And people who feel like, you know, Republicans were being shot out in Massachusetts, well, they would get their 3 reps maybe there, and the Democrats wouldn't get shut out in Oklahoma anymore. So, yeah, I think that could be a big change too, and we could do it.
I'll just say one more. I think you were going to ask for another question. Just one last thing on this. When Speaker Pelosi took the speakership the second time, they had their retreat right before the Congress is seated, and I went down and we talked about how their very first bill should be a democracy bill with a lot of these reforms in it, and it was House 1. And I think it moved, I'm certain it moved through the House. I think it got stuck in the Senate because of the filibuster, and the Democrats were in charge.
You've identified mostly, or started to address issues that inhibit good government on the federal level. You were talking about Mandami and the comment that he's going to get elected, but he's not going to be able to get anything done. So that's on the city level. You were at the state level. We have a good functioning legislature here, and with the governor, that they're having trouble working together. But effective public policy is not being generated. Can you go a little bit further about our political dynamic at every level that's preventing government from doing what people want it to do?
Well, I would start, it doesn't all come back to money, but a lot of it does. There is so much, you know, you often, I respect people who have, who've made a career of elective office. I really do. It wasn't my choice. I see how challenging it is. I see how deep some of their expertise goes. But I also encounter people who have been in elective office who are thinking a lot more about having the job than doing it. And and to have the job now, in a lot of places means raising a whole bunch of money all the time. I think, what's the estimate, 60% of a congressperson's time is spent raising money for the next election. I think it's approaching that for Senate. And the numbers are just insane. And so if do you remember there was a appointee, I think in the first Trump administration, a Republican congressman who made a comment about, I can't remember his name, about how he never took a meeting from a constituent who hadn't been a donor, because in his view it was a waste of time. So I don't mean to blame it all on money, but I see how much money influences, overweights, if you will, the influence on policy. And there's a lot of expertise on how not to do things, how to shut things down, a lot of it, at every level I've seen. A lot less on how to do something big and new and transformative. And yet the appetite of the public is there today. So I think there are a couple, I think that kind of brings me back to the other point I was making about how important it is for us as citizens to stay engaged after the election. And rather than saying, you know, well, we got this one or that one in, and we voted for this one or that one because of his or her agenda, and now we'll put that on autopilot. We got to stay in that person's face, frankly. And that has to be a part of, I mean, I think we figured out the grassroots campaigning, and we also figured out, and I think President Obama says the same thing, that grassroots governing is a lot harder. But it's really important to figure out how to stay close to the people who invested in how you think about public service and keep your mind open. And the last thing I will say is, I do not want to be heard to be one of these folks who think you're only there to govern the people who voted for you. I really feel strongly that when you win, you're everybody's governor, you're everybody's president, you're the ones who voted for you, the ones who didn't, and the ones who could care less. You have to be thinking about all of them. I think it's a big, big shortcoming of our current president.
Yeah, that's the prize you get when you win public office. Now you have to serve everybody. Can I just add something about local politics? Because you were referring to municipal politics a little bit, and their money matters too, but in a different way. And it's mainly because of the fiscal constraints on towns and cities. That capital flight is a thing, right? And if the tax rates go up, people leave, firms leave, and so on. And this is where there's a feature of American politics that's kind of crazy, but people vote at what the turnout, that is, the turnout for local elections and state elections is much lower than national elections. That somehow that's the kind of thing that motivates, Trump will motivate people to the polls, but something that's happening right in their backyard will not. And that's where people getting engaged and being in the face of local officials and being part of citizens who show up to ask questions, that's where they can be a counterweight to the power of capital in a city where you really have to worry about your tax base. And so that's where I would encourage people to get going.
Okay, we have a question here, and then we'll go.
Governor Patrick, I'm Darren Stellens. I'm Honorary Consul for Latvia in Vermont. I came here to the United States in 1981-82 as a Fulbright scholar. It was probably the best decision I made in my life, and like a lot of people, I'm just shocked that the government's disabling that whole sort of program. My question to you from your experience is that I grew up in Australia where we had compulsory voting. So once every 4 years, I had to go to the ballot box. If I didn't turn up, I was fined $25, and I could write whatever I wanted on the ballot paper. The guy's a ratbag, terrific, or whatever, but I was forced to vote. So maybe, and I'd like your insights, whether we should consider compulsory voting in this country to capture those 90 million disaffected people who sit at home, and then they complain, or they take out a gun, or they get angry. The next question is, should we consider term limits? Because maybe the Democratic Party, as you may know, and also the Republican Party also, has become so ossified that we end up having the same monkeys running our show. So, maybe these are two things we should consider. And lastly, what's your advice for the Democratic Party come next November? Should they really go low, not stay high, as Michelle Obama told them to stay high, and really play dirty, because our democracy is at risk. We are heading towards autocracy, and the next 50 years may not be as pleasant as the last 50 years were.
Well, one question per customer. So which one? All right, let's see. So the first one was compulsory voting. I've always thought that was a wonderful idea. I'm not sure it would sell here in the United States because we hate to be told to do anything. And we conflate freedom with indulgence, self-indulgence, and a lack of responsibility. So I think it would take a whole lot to make compulsory voting meaningful, unless you said you can come and write, he's a something or other, she's a so-and-so on the ballot. By the way, I think the point about the 90 million who didn't vote is also about not being invited to feel like it matters. And to an earlier question, in a way, it doesn't. Right? That you think of the number of big things we know that are supposed controversies, where if polling is to be believed, Americans overwhelmingly are in favor of one outcome, but we cannot get action in the Congress. So there's a lot more in that civic equation, I think, from where I sit, than compulsory voting. But if we were invested in the rest of that civic equation, then compulsory voting, I think, could be really attractive. The same way I feel about compulsory service. I think we should, not military necessarily, but public service should be a requirement of every graduating senior, let's say. And others of us, at stages in our lives when we can. Your second question was about term limits. And I don't favor term limits for the reason that generally I just don't favor putting our democracy on autopilot. People stay in office because we don't show up and vote them out. Or we don't encourage candidates to step up and challenge them. I was on the phone with a young man on the way up in those pockets where I had cell service, who is thinking about running for Congress against a long-time incumbent Democrat, and he wants help in the primary. And I've known him a long time. He's a fabulous young man, and he has very much this sense of service leadership, which is so, I think, needed today. And he was talking about how he can't get any traction among people because folks keep saying you can't win, which is exactly what they said to me. They're not going to invest in a candidate or a person like this guy who they know would be great because they don't want to take a chance on somebody who can't win. And there's a way in which, I totally get that term limits would solve that, but it wouldn't necessarily solve for the interest in service leadership among the alternative that we put in place. You see what I'm saying? So I feel like we should take more responsibility for standing up to run for office and supporting a newcomer who has a fresh voice and idea, and not just a critique of somebody. The term limits, we wouldn't have gotten the best of Ted Kennedy. And the best of Ted Kennedy was the last 15 and 20 years of his time in office. So I'm squishy on that. I get the argument, but I'm squishy on it. And the third one was about, what was it about?
Do the Democrats play dirty?
Oh, do we play dirty? No, but I don't think, I do think we ought to, I'm just going to repeat myself. I think we win with fresh ideas that are alternatives, not that are just responses to the ideas that are being put out by the other side, but are responses to what we learn listening to people, and that are very straightforward, and some of them ambitious. That does not mean that we don't call hate and division and political violence what it is when it's inspired by the other side. I'm just saying that I think we have to have more than have perfected our case about what's wrong with the other side. We've got to be able to say what's right with ours.
I would just add one thing that on the term limits question is, you know, you can also talk about mandatory retirement age. And I think
Yes.
we could institute that not just for elective office, but also for the Supreme Court.
Yes, amen. I want to be sensitive. I see you here. I think this gentleman had his hand up. Do you mind?
No, not at all.
Okay, I'll just try to be quick.
My
Are
question-
all the shy people in the back, have we... Did you have your hand up in the way back? Okay.
So my question is how the Democrats find their way. I feel like the Democrats used to be the party of the working class, and we've just completely lost touch and become more of a party of the rich. How do the Democrats find a new narrative to be able to win again? Because it just doesn't seem like we have that capability anymore.
I don't know the answer to that question. I'm the wrong one to speak for the party. I'm not even in the game, except to, you know, coach people who call. I want to challenge a little bit the premise, if I may. I don't think we're the party of the rich. I think there are rich people in the party. I think there are poor people in the party. But going back to something, and everybody in between, I think what we have done to our detriment for a long time, back to something I was saying earlier, is we've been counting those voters without talking to them. And it's a weird kind of thing. I don't think President Trump gives a whit about those vulnerable voters, but he talks to them. He talks to them. The number of people I met in the course of 8 years, or campaigning for a year or two before then, who said, you know, I just didn't agree with this or that, but you came to my town. You came to, you know, it really bothered me when you did this. I liked it when you did that. But you know, when I told you I didn't like it, you listened to me. And they tell somebody else, and that person tells somebody else. It's human interaction. And so there's frankly a power in the respect shown by showing up, right? And I think that's something, I don't know if that was a calculation of President Trump. Corey Lewandowski, whom I know, says it was, or just an accident, just something he stumbled upon in his performances. But it resonates. And meanwhile, what are we doing? Where are we? This is what Senator Sanders did the first time he ran, to tremendous effect. Again, right questions for a lot of sort of mainstream or establishment Democrats, the wrong answers. And so instead of engaging those questions, it was about, we got to figure out how to keep Senator Sanders out of the presidency. I mean, I was around for some of those conversations. I wasn't part of it, but I was around. You see what I'm saying? So I feel like there's I feel like the formula that Democrats have used to talk about winning elections is out of date and has been stale for a long time. A long time. But coming back from that with a positive, ambitious agenda that is about opportunity for everyone everywhere, I think is very much within reach. And the last thing I'll say is this. I promised my answer would be short, but I can't help myself. If you think about what is portrayed as the grievances, I think that's the term used, of white working people and rural people, as the president talked about it, around economic uncertainty, social isolation, despair, as measured by things like suicide rates or addiction rates. It's exactly the same wounds that black and brown people in cities have been feeling for a long time, right? It's exactly the same anguish, the same craving for solutions. Not all of them government, not by any means all of them from government, but being seen by folks in leadership, which to me was a huge opportunity for Democrats to show up in places that are not supposed to be Democratic strongholds and say, we see you, and this is exactly what we're working on. What would your solutions be? What would your ideas be? Do you see what I'm saying?
Can I just add something? That I do think that the word elite gets used a lot in this context. It doesn't necessarily mean rich, because the biggest divide between left and right in this country, and in many other countries now, is between whether or not you're college educated. And that's the party of the Democratic Party. However, people who make their money and live by capital tend to be in the Republican Party. And the poorest people in the country tend to be in the Democratic Party. So we have, it's complicated, but when the word elite is shown, is given, it's mainly a kind of intellectual elite, or it's an educational elite that translates into income, of course, because people generally with college educations have made more money than people without them. But it's different, and it doesn't translate perfectly into rich versus poor.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Governor, for being here. I wanted to draw upon your experience, Governor, in business, law, and politics, if I may, with this question. It's a money and politics question, but a little bit different perspective. There seems to be a growing trend of corporations getting equity interest from the United States government, the federal government, in companies, and this seems to be somewhat of a program, but it's being more formalized, or at least considered to be more formalized. So I wanted to ask your opinion about that concept, and also, how do we avoid the phenomenal conflicts of interest that will conceivably arise from that, with favorable rulings of the different agencies in the federal government and other things that will present conflicts for these companies, and for us as the taxpayers and citizens?
You know, it's such an interesting and important question. Thank you. When I was in office, we had something called the Life Sciences Initiative, which was one of the strategies for climbing out of recession. And we got the commitment from the legislature, quite unusual, for a small amount of money in this larger package, which was discretionary grants. It wasn't, you know, we had a panel of scientists who would make those decisions, led by a Nobel laureate. And the idea was to fund these, bless you, these terrific ideas that were in the so-called valley of death, right? So they'd proven concept, but they weren't quite ready, investor ready. And with a little, you know, few tens of thousands. One of them, by the way, was called Moderna. And I remember saying at the time, we're putting public money in, shouldn't we get a stake? And I was told that that under the Massachusetts Constitution, we couldn't do it, which is too bad. But it may be that the reason that's in the Massachusetts Constitution is precisely what you're talking about, right? You serve everyone, and the rules have to, or ought to, apply evenly to everyone. And if you have a stake in a particular industry or company that has an interest in government, it's just natural that you want to figure out the rule in a way that makes it possible for that moneyed that interest of the governments in that company to thrive. Not in every case, but I think that's the situation you're posing. I think that, you know, that if you weren't so dangerous, he'd almost be cartoonish, I think, the president sometimes, because it's like he can't help but get something from whatever it is he gives. He just can't help but ask for something back. There's so little magnanimity in his view. Back to the point about service leadership, I don't think that is what he brings. So I think it's a problem. I think it's going to be, I think we are seeing it's a problem. And I think we run the risk of getting used to that problem, like other oversteps. And I worry about that. I don't know how to unwind that afterwards, but somebody's going to have to sort that out.
One reason the Republicans are so successful is they speak with one voice. Now, granted, under fear of political death if they don't. But the Democrats, we're divided. Are we liberals or are we progressives? Which wing do you think has the strongest chance of actually winning in 2028? I mean,
Wow.
I think we need to be pragmatic at this point rather than idealistic.
Yeah. So I'm not going to be hopeful here. I think all these terms are stale. I don't think you can get folks to I mean, our friend here talked about Medicare for all. I'm a believer in universal health care. I really thought, and we were one vote, one Democratic senator's vote from a public option in Obamacare, which I think would have been transformative. But I remember going to Iowa and asking a room larger than this, how many of you support Medicare for all? All these hands went up. And I said, what is Medicare for all? Pointing to one. They gave one answer. Somebody else gave a different one. This one over there. It's a great slogan that doesn't mean the same thing to people. And I think liberals and progressives and all that, in the same way I think the Democratic brand doesn't have a meaning right now. What I want is for a would-be leader, and I think there's some great ones coming, to frame the kind of country we want, and for the policy choices to reflect that. I'm working on a project called Shared America, which is we started it when I was at the Kennedy School, because I had a hunch we were less divided than we are portrayed. I wanted to believe that. And it was a deep listening project that we did for a couple of years. And all kinds of people, all kinds of polling, all kinds of focus groups and so on, and lots of open-ended questions. And we found there was a lot of appetite for people working together and knowing each other across differences. They just didn't want to have to first renounce whatever political views they had before they got to break bread or build a playground together. Because it's just about being finding common cause and building trust before you can persuade. The other things we learned is that folks coalesced around three, I would call them American aspirations. Freedom did not surprise me. That was first. Guess what the other two were? Opportunity and equality. All kinds of people, all over the country. There's a lot of hope in that. And I think there's a lot of my reasons for being a Democrat in that. But you don't often hear an opportunity agenda from the Democratic Party, right? You don't often hear, you rarely heard the abortion question talked about as a freedom question. What really does it mean to be free? And it can't mean that, every freedom you or I have is at the expense of somebody else. There's got to be a way to think about what it means to live in a national community and what our rights and responsibilities are in that. I want us to start there and then build our policy positions, link our policy positions to that. I'm no sloganeer, so I can't tell you whether, what that should be called. I can tell you that whatever it is, the other side will call it liberal or progressive or, you know, everything but a child of God. And we have to forget about that and just focus on not some shorthand that is responsive to them, but some articulation of what we are about, and not have it be just about how we appeal to one another who are already committed to the party to the extent we are. Does that make sense? I know it's not what you wanted, but that's what I got.
So,
Are you guys okay in time?
separate and apart from the assassination which occurred, which captured a lot of imagination, we recorded the 47th shooting at a school in our nation in 2025. Any rational person who would look at that would say, this is absurd, and we need to find a solution. But sadly, it is also equally political. How in the world can we get out from that mess and come up with something that makes sense? We're a civilized nation.
You know, it's so, first of all, thank you for making that, that point. And this is the notion of sensible gun safety rules, you know, National Registry, and I mean, there are a handful of these are on that list of things that poll way in favor, but that don't move in the United States Congress. And they don't move because there are moneyed interests that make sure they don't move. I've been reading this book called Lethal Passage by Eric Larson. Any of you read this book? He's a fantastic writer, yeah. And it's a chilling, he starts, you know Eric Larson's work? I don't mean to be doing an Eric Larson commercial right now, but he's a wonderful storyteller, and he starts the book talking about a school shooting in Virginia some years ago, and he goes from there. He talks about the shooter and the community and the acquisition of this gun, and he explores the whole, as he describes it, gun culture and gun manufacturing, and the history of gun law lobbying, and it is incredibly discouraging how well organized and supported and opportunistic some of our candidates and elected leaders have been about, you know, stirring that pot. So I think there's a whole lot we can do that makes sense around safety, that we can do if we decide we're going to make our elected officials serve us in some of the ways we've been talking about. But we're unlikely to get it with the system we have, because it's as broken as the first questioner asked. That's my view.
I have a semi-cynical response to that also. In California in 1967, they were debating gun control at the state level. Governor Reagan was in power. They got gun control after the Black Panthers assembled on the steps of the Capitol in Sacramento with their weapons. So this whole assumption that somehow the establishment wants to have free guns everywhere. Well, when they see a group of people that they regard as a subversive group wielding their weapons, they suddenly see the virtues in controlling them.
I hate to end on that note. Judy Woodruff.
Yeah, we have another 7 minutes.
Okay, I'll try to take 10. I'm kidding. Judy Woodruff has a wonderful PBS program called America at the Crossroads. And if you Google the Tennessee 11, you'll find that Tennessee had a gun control controversy after a school shooting. And 11 Tennesseans came together across the political spectrum, and they sat down and they first talked about their experience of guns. Some were hunters, some had lost people to guns, and they came up after many weeks with a proposal for reasonable gun control that they brought to the Tennessee legislature. It got voted down. They decided they were going to stick with it, and they came back again with another proposal that got passed. So this is the kind of thing in shared America where you get communities working together across the spectrum. They can actually make progress.
That's what I think we're saying the same thing.
Exactly, and I don't want that to get lost as we think about our broken politics.
We agree.
Governor, thank you for coming tonight. You've said more in this hour that makes me think than I can handle almost. It's very profound. I think you said 5 minutes ago or so that you felt our elections should be more about what this nation is about. And my question is, you sit in councils and conversations and committees of power. Are our leaders thinking in that direction, or are they still just thinking boots on the ground and current issues?
With a couple of exceptions, I would say they are not, except as a rhetorical device. If then, I think there's a weight in leadership. There's a gravity in leadership that is not the same thing as holding office. This is back to my point about folks wanting to have these jobs rather than do them. Doing them, you know, for some who have them, for some, there's an awful lot of time invested in accumulating political capital. But if you want to do something, you have to spend the political capital. It's just, that's how it is. You have to put it out there. You have to try things. You have to be willing to lose. You have to run willing to lose. And I don't think that's if you're new and you turn to the experts, they will tell you that's naive. The way you win is to do the things we're talking about. Get everybody who you know who can write the maximum check to write the maximum check. I remember one of the first political contributions I got was from somebody with a note, which I have framed, saying, "I don't think you have a snowball's chance in hell of winning, but I believe in putting our money where our beliefs are, and here's $5, and I will send you $5 in a check," so it wasn't cash. "And I will send you $5 as I can as we go along." It was incredibly meaningful, right? Because that was somebody who was saying, "I am investing first of all time in this note, but also scarce resources," because they felt invited. They felt like we were trying to do something that was different, not just be the first black guy who got the job, but to try to be the best at it, and try to do that for everybody. We have one of our biggest challenges as a country right now is cynicism, and I think Professor, the sowing of cynicism has been a strategy of authoritarian regimes, that you are persuaded it doesn't matter, to give up, it just can't count. And and I hear that you asked earlier about young people. I hear that a lot from young people, so that when there is a leader who comes along and says, actually, this is up to us, that there isn't a single problem we've created that is beyond our capacity to care about or to solve. Not one. Not one. But it will take sacrifice and imagination in new ways and risk taking. And I still think we are up to that. And there are a couple people I do hear who talk about that, not just as a rhetorical flourish when they're in public, but when we're sitting around the table.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yes, Governor, who would you like to see run for president on behalf of the Democratic Party?
Oh, it's a shame our time is up.
So the question is...
Thank you all for coming.
The question was, who would he like to see the Democratic Party nominate for president in 2028?
No, who he would like to see run?
Run.
Would you like to see run? Okay. Oh, just run, okay.
Yeah. You know, it's a funny thing, and I'm not being cute. I'm not sure I want to wish that on anybody. No, I'm not being. It's brutal. If my campaign manager from 2006 were alive today, and my wife were different, I'd run myself just because I think it's. That's a sign. But just because I would like to test whether what I think is so, and if it works, meaning if it moves people to take agency, to take responsibility, then maybe that will give some cover for others who'd like to try it out for this or that office, for president or something else. There's some people I watch closely, and a couple I talk to. Westmore in Maryland is amazing, really amazing. I've known JB since he was, I don't know, 14 years old, 15 years old. He's an extraordinary person with a big heart, and I think there's a heart you have to have to do those kinds of jobs. But I think he's really torn about whether he should run. I think Wes is too. I want to allow the possibility of surprise too. That there's somebody I've never heard of who takes a chance, you know, on service of that kind because he or she appreciates that the country took a chance on them, you know, as it does on all of us. So I don't have a better answer for your question, but those are a couple of the people I know of who I think are trying to, you know, process their readiness for this moment and whether they have something to contribute in this moment. And that's why I'm paying attention to those two in particular. Steve, by the way, Steve Bashir in Kentucky is pretty great too. Yeah.
Gloria.
So, well, thank you both for an incredibly insightful. Before you leave, I'd like to invite you to join us next week when we have two programs. First, on Tuesday, September 16th, we will navigate the creative and legal landscape of AI-generated music with Sandy Wilbur, a noted forensic musicologist and composer, and Patricia Nelson, an experienced copyright attorney. And then on Thursday, September 18th, we have a look through the ecological garden lens, rethinking our home landscape practices with Ashley Robinson, a Virginia-based landscape designer. Both of these programs will be held here at the Art Center in Yester House, and they start at 5:30. But I also want you to mark your calendars for Saturday, September 27th for the film premiere of Reunion at 5 o'clock here in the Arkell. This documentary is produced by Bob Van Degna with significant contributions by Stephen Schau, Andrew Koss, and Maxine Linehan. Tickets are on sale now on our website, and you do not want to miss this. Thank you again for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evening.